All right, the next question we got is Sue Hodnett. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Sue Hodnett. Hodnett. I apologize. When you have a name like Guyton, I think it lets you butcher other people's names because my name has been said the wrong way.
Guiton.
Yeah. Guion, Guyton, Gayton.
They mess up Troy, too, believe it or not.
They'll call me Scott.
I've been called Tony, Tori.
I've been called Jack.
Really? How do you get Jack out of Guyton?
I don't know, but I have. But she asked this question, actually two questions. Let's deal with the first one. Where did the giants come from in Genesis chapter 6? And I'll go ahead and say the second one too. Where was Jesus for 40 days after his resurrection when he wasn't visiting his disciples, which seems like a very short time? And so, what we're dealing with in Genesis chapter 6, when it talks about giants, are you getting there for us?
Yes.
I kind of jumped the gun on this question, but I want to go ahead and get to it. I think it's a good question because in verse 4, or let me say verse 3, it says, "And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown." And there's about 3 questions we could answer if we had plenty of time, but we're just going to stick to the giants there. Where did they come from? Troy?
We don't know.
Okay. Sounds good to me. I mean, that's a great answer. And Sue, did I get that right? Yeah, Sue, please don't take that as being a bad answer. But remember, we want to give a Bible answer to a Bible question, and there is no dumb question. It's just, unfortunately, sometimes the questions we want to ask, we can't answer because God doesn't give us the answer.
That's exactly right. And then other parts of that, too, is sometimes you just need to dig a little deeper and look at what is there. And the only thing that we have that is there is this word. If you look in other translations, you're going to see that translated different ways. And the way that they translate it is this word Nephilim. And then if you go and look up what the scholars and the people who translate words say, sometimes it's the word giant, but it's also the word bully or tyrant. Mm-hmm. And so it could be a translation issue.
Yeah. But I don't want to take away the concept of giants and people because, if we take out the Philistines.
Exactly.
Which were the sea people before they were the Philistines. And from the area, I believe around Crete is where they originally came from there, which, of course, all these came from Adam and Eve. We know that. All man originated with the mother of all living, and Adam being the first man.
I had a thought also, why couldn't it just be simply the same thing that we see in breeds of other animals? You have dogs that have all kinds of different sizes and shapes and everything else. I mean, human beings as well, we have different ethnicities and everything else. It could simply just be the genes or something. That's where, the giant came from Goliath.
Exactly. Brad Harrop has an excellent book called Convicted that he traces the different skin colors back.
Huh.
And he shows how Adam and Eve can carry the genes. And maybe we could have him on a show one day as a guest, and he could explain this because he has the science background for it. But it's really interesting how they can carry the genes for certain things. So you go back to that time. It's not surprising to think that perhaps you could have civilizations or groups of people that had certain traits. Now, the giants, like in the Philistines, I mean, do we have people today that could be classified as giants? Maybe not quite in the way that the Philistines were, but I mean, you remember Andre the Giant?
I was just thinking that's very Andre the Giant. That man was huge. Well, think of Shaq. Right. What about Shaq?
I was going to say, look, I have in my time known some people that were massive. I used to be in law enforcement, and I remember this one guy, and he had some mental issues, and sometimes we had to go out there, and it was one of those things we never really wanted to have to get into it with him because he was so massive. And that's what I've always equated maybe looking at Goliath about, because, I mean, there'd be like 10 of us out there because he was so big that literally to handcuff him, he liked me for some reason. And he would be like, well, here you go, and let me handcuff him. I had to use leg irons, and they barely would fit around his.
Incredible.
He was just massive. So do the genes, are they out there for giants to exist? They are. Where did they come from? The genetic makeup that Adam and Eve covered, we know it has to be that. Could it be a translation issue that it has to do with their demeanor? I think that's very possible, because when you look at the idea of them, let me get this right here, the sons of God. Now, sons of God throughout Scripture is used to describe those that follow after him. The daughters of men is the idea of the those of this world.
That's right.
And so, could that be describing here? Sure.
Right.
It's showing the difference. Jeff?
Well, it's talking about the widespread existence of sin in the world, and I get the impression, the idea of a tyrant or a bully, and of course this is over a period of time, and it mentions here also that the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown, but then it gets into the idea that we get the impression that these were responsible in some degree for maybe intimidating people in the sinful activity, being a tyrant or a bully, if we're going to put it to.
And that's why the word giant comes out in that translation there. So.
Right. And sometimes, when we think of gigantism today, and that's what it's called, usually because we have more medical knowledge, it's an overactive pituitary gland. And I know a lot of people that have that problem, they have a lot of physical issues that go along with it.
There you go.
And
so it goes back to that genetic makeup. And so,
right.
Are there possibilities? Do giants exist? Yes. Not Jack and the Beanstalk giants, but men that are of gigantic proportions, right. Certainly. Yeah.
Going back to what Guyton said earlier, there's no question that is a bad question. Anytime you ask a question in the Bible, it is wonderful, and you need to be doing that. One thing you do have to keep in mind, though, sometimes we don't have all the answers in the Bible, and that's all we can do is go to the Bible and make sure that we are adhering to what it says. And things like this are really fascinating and interesting, but we need to understand that that's all it is. It's just interesting and fascinating. It's interesting to study, but it's not anything that really affects our salvation. It doesn't affect things like Christianity and worship. And so we always got to keep that in mind when we're asking a question. But what a great question and fascinating, I think.
Oh, I mean, it's awful. Awesome is what I was trying to say, but I was reading another word that threw me off here. But you're exactly right. I mean, because he talks about the idea of avoiding, and I was trying to find it in Titus. Jeff, help me out about vain questions or vain conversations. Do you know?
I think that's in Titus chapter 2.
Titus 2.
About him being an example. It's around 7 or 8. And I know he used similar language talking to Timothy, about.
Well, I had it earlier. We were talking about that a little bit, and I can't find it right now. But anyway, we have to be careful about going down too many roads. But as long as your heart's right in what you're asking and it's sincere, then certainly we want to answer those. So that's a great question. We'll get to that question, that verse here in just a second. But verse, that was the first part. Sue's second part is, where was Jesus for those 40 days after his resurrection when he was visiting his disciples, which seems like a very short time. And simply put, the question is, we don't know. We could postulate ideas, but ultimately we just don't know. We know he was with his disciples. If I look back at his life, and I think a lot about this because John 17 records for us a prayer that he prayed with the idea that he was going to be leaving his disciples. Oftentimes he goes off in seclusion, and we see that like before the calming of the storm, in which, calming of the storm before going on the ship, before actually walking on the water. We have the case in which he was to, he had given himself to seclusion, in order to prep for prayer. And then we take John 17 where he's praying for his disciples, concerned about, when he's gone, he wants them to be unified. Is it very plausible he spent a lot of time in prayer? Sure. Possibly. Could he have spent time with his mother during that time? That's plausible. Again, he was more concerned about his father's business whenever it was at the temple, whenever he says, why seeketh me? Know ye not, wished ye not that I be about my father's business?
Yeah, when he was 12.
But on the cross, he did speak down and said, to the disciple he loved, behold my mother, and saying, take care of her. So, obviously he showed concern for his mother in those dying moments. Is it possible that he had spent some time with family? Perhaps, maybe so, but ultimately we don't know. I'm reminded in John, it says that the books could not contain, all the books in this world could not contain everything that he did.
Right.
And so the things we have recorded are recorded by inspiration of God, 2 Timothy 3:16-17, and they are with purpose, and it doesn't tell us. And so anything you want to add to that, Troy?
I think you answered it very well. One of those things that, again, we just got to go by what the Bible actually tells us, and that's all we have sometimes. So,
Did you find my verse for me? You were looking for it.
That's what I was doing, and one that I found, it's not the verse we were talking about earlier. It's so weird how that happens sometimes.
Oh, I know it.
But 2 Timothy 2, verse 16, it says, shun profane and idle babblings, for they will increase to more ungodliness.
Yes.
But there's so many references to that.
Right.
In fact, that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my cross references here. You find it?
Yeah, I found 1 Timothy 1, verse 4, neither give heed to fables and endless genealogies which minister questions, rather than godly edifying which is in faith, so do. That was similar to those things that gender questions or
And that's the thing.
cause issues, yeah.
That's the thing. There's several verses that
Right.
that basically
That's
teach that.
just one of them.